30,000 human warships surrounded the Valkyrie homeworld like a ring of steel. And Ambassador Yoon Seojin stood once again in the grand chamber of the hegemonic council. But this time, everything was different. This time, her brother Admiral Yoon Tae-yen stood at her side in full military uniform. And behind them stood a delegation of human officers and diplomats. And the other council species looked at them with respect instead of curiosity, and Hierarch and Kethrix, who had declared war with such confidence 2 years ago, sat in his seat with the weight of defeat pressing down upon his shoulders. The Valkyrie Dominion requests terms for the cessation of hostilities, he said, and every word seemed to cause him physical pain. The chamber was silent, as the galaxy waited to see what humanity would demand. Seojin stepped forward and looked up at the alien who had started a war that killed millions of her people. She thought of New Bizan and the crew of the Defiant singing as they died. She thought of the resistance fighters who had given their lives to hold the line. She thought of her brother, who had led the counteroffensive that brought the Valkyrie to their knees. And then she spoke. And her words surprised everyone in the chamber. Humanity does not seek subjects or slaves, she said. And we do not want your worlds or your resources or your submission. Kethrix's compound eyes flickered with confusion. Ma'am, what you want? He asked. Seojin took a breath before answering. We want partners, she said. The chamber erupted in whispers and murmurs as the council species processed this unexpected response. The Marathi delegates' bioluminescence shifted through colors that indicated extreme surprise. The Asini ambassador leaned forward, with all its faceted eyes focused on Seojin. Even the ancient Druan elder stirred in his seat with apparent interest. Kethrix rose from his seat and descended to the chamber floor. And for the first time in the war, he stood face to face with a human as an equal rather than as a conqueror. You have the power to destroy us, he said, and your fleet surrounds our homeworld. And yet you offer partnership. Yes, Seojin replied simply. Why? Kethrix demanded. And his voice carried genuine bewilderment before Seojin could answer. The chamber doors opened and a small group entered. Intelligence Director Choi Yoonji led the way. And beside her walked the captured Hive General from Meridian, no longer in restraints. Walking freely among her former captors, Kethrix stared at the Hive General as if seeing a ghost. General Vethsira, he said. You are alive. I am alive, she confirmed. And I am here because the humans asked me to speak on their behalf. She stepped forward and addressed the full council. I have been a prisoner of war for 18 months, she said. And in that time I have learned more about humanity than our intelligence services discovered in 50 years of observation. She paused and looked directly at Kethrix. They could have tortured me for information, but instead they gave me food and medicine and conversation. They could have executed me as revenge for our attacks on their colonies, but instead they treated my wounds and asked about my family. They could have used me as a hostage to force concessions, but instead they simply let me live. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, High Archon. The Valkyrie have always believed that mercy is weakness. And for 3,000 years, we conquered the galaxy based on this belief. But we were wrong. The humans showed me mercy not because they are weak, but because they are strong enough to choose how they treat their enemies. And now they are strong enough to offer us partnership instead of destruction. She turned to face the full council. I have seen what humanity is capable of when they are angry, and it is terrifying beyond anything in our history. But I have also seen what they are capable of when they choose peace. They do not want to rule us, she said. And they do not want revenge, and they do not want our fear. They want something that we have never offered to any species we conquered. They want to be our friends. The chamber fell silent as Vethsirus Uswards sank and Kethrix stood motionless for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "You truly believe this?" he said to Seojin. "I do," she replied, "because I have seen what hatred and war can do, and I have decided that I would rather build something new than continue destroying what already exists." She extended her hand toward Kethrix in a human gesture of friendship. "The Velthari are the greatest warriors in the galaxy," she said, "and humanity is the most adaptable species in the galaxy. And together we could protect this sector from threats that neither of us could face alone. There are dangers beyond the known galaxy that will require all of us to stand together. So this is my offer. Archon, help us build something better, and let us end this war not as enemies, but as allies." Kethrix looked at the extended hand, and in that moment the entire galaxy held its breath. Then, slowly, he reached out and clasped Seojin's hand in his own. "The Velthari accept your terms," he said, "and may this day mark the beginning of a new era for both our peoples." The council chamber erupted in sounds of relief and celebration, and species that had watched the war with fear now looked to the future. With hope, the treaty was signed that same day. Occupied colonies were returned to human. Control prisoners were exchanged. A new alliance was formed between species that had nearly destroyed each other 1 year later. Ambassador Yoon Suk-jin stood beside High Archon Kethrix in the same council chamber, welcoming a new species to the galactic community. The ceremony was routine, but Kethrix seemed troubled when the new ambassadors had departed. He turned to Seojin with a question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "I must know something." "Ask," Seoji replied. "During the war, when your people faced our fleets, when your colonies burned and your soldiers died, were you ever truly afraid?" Seojin thought about the question carefully before answering. She thought of her brother leading the counteroffensive. She thought of Captain Wam Mira diving her ship into the Velthari flagship. She thought of the resistance, fighters who had held the line against impossible odds every moment, she said finally. "And we were terrified from the first day to the last." Kethrix tilted his head in confusion. "Then how did you keep fighting?" he asked. Seojin smiled, and it was a smile that carried the weight of everything humanity had endured and everything they had chosen not to become. "Because fear has never stopped us," she said, "and it never will." Across the chamber, the ancient Druan elder watched this exchange with knowing eyes. When Kethrix finally walked away, still pondering Seojin's words, the elder spoke for the first time in months. "Now you understand," he said to no one in particular, "why I warned you. The war was over. Humanity had won, but more importantly, they had proven something that the galaxy would never forget. They had proven that the greatest strength is not the power to destroy. It is the courage to choose something better." And in the years that followed, as human and Velthari ships patrolled the borders together, and human and Velthari scientists worked side by side, the galaxy learned that some species are forged in fire not to burn the universe down, but to light the way forward. And that was the story of how humanity went to war with the Velthari Dominion and chose not to become the monsters they fought, but to remain against all odds and through all darkness, exactly what they had always been: human. The Ashfall Nebula burned with the light of 1,000 dying ships, and Fleet Admiral Yoon Tae-yoon stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the Velthari military machine break apart before his eyes. The battle had lasted 9 days. 9 days of constant fighting, of ships ramming each other in the darkness, of crews working without sleep to repair damage faster than the enemy could inflict it, of tactical maneuvers that would be studied in military academies for centuries to come. And now, finally, It was ending, Admiral. The Valkyrie command ship is attempting to retreat. His tactical officer reported. Taehin shook his head. No retreats today, he said. And send the 7th Fleet to cut off their escape route. He watched on the display as 60 human warships moved to intercept the fleeing Valkyrie command vessel. And he felt no joy in this moment, only a grim satisfaction that the tide had turned 1 year ago. 3 human destroyers had faced 47 Valkyrie warships and died to save 12 million civilians today. The human fleet numbered in the thousands. And the Valkyrie were the ones running for their lives. The factories had never stopped building. Orbital construction yards that operated around the clock had produced ships at a rate that astonished even the humans themselves. Engineers who had spent their careers designing commercial vessels had pivoted to warships with a creativity that no alien species could match, and the crews who flew these ships were volunteers, every single one of them. People who had watched the footage of the Defiance's final charge and decided that they would rather die fighting than live in a galaxy where the Valkyrie could threaten their homes. The 7th Fleet caught the Valkyrie command ship and destroyed it in a brief and brutal engagement. And with that, the Battle of Ashfall Nebula was over. The Valkyrie had lost their primary military staging ground. The road to their homeworld was open. Taehin allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection before turning to his communications. Officer, send a message to command, he said, and tell them Phase 1 is complete. 3 days later, human scout ships entered the Valkyrie home system for the first time in history. They did not attack. They did not need to attack. Their presence alone was enough to send waves of panic through a civilization that had never been invaded in 3,000 years on the Valkyrie homeworld. Civilians looked up at the sky and knew that somewhere beyond the clouds, human warships were watching them. Kethfrix received this news in his war chamber, and for the first time since the war began, he had no orders to give. His military advisors spoke of defensive positions and counterattacks and strategic retreats, but he barely heard them. He was thinking about the captured Hive General on Meridian. He had continued to receive reports about her captivity, and what he read had shaken his understanding of everything the humans had given her. Comfortable quarters and regular meals they had provided. Medical treatment for her injuries. They had assigned a translation device. She could communicate with her captors. And most disturbing of all, they had begun having conversations with her about philosophy and history and the meaning of life. She had been a prisoner for more than a year now, and she had not been harmed once. Kethfrix did not understand this, and his inability to understand terrified him more than any military defeat. A communication request arrived from Meridian, and when Kethfrix accepted it, he found himself looking at the Hive General herself. She looked different from the proud warrior he remembered, not broken, but changed, as if something fundamental had shifted inside her High Archon. She said, and her voice was calm and thoughtful, "I have learned things about our enemy that you need to understand. Speak." Kethfrix commanded. The Hive General was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "They could destroy our homeworld," she said, "and they have the ships and the weapons and the will to do it. And yet they have not done it. They are waiting for the right moment." Kethfrix said dismissively, "No," the Hive General replied, "and I know this because I asked them directly." Kethfrix leaned forward with reluctant interest. "What did they say?" "They said they are not like us," the Hive General answered. "And at first I did not understand what this meant, but after a year of living among them, I think I finally do." She paused and then continued, "The Valkyrie wage war to dominate. And we conquer because conquest is in our nature, and we cannot imagine any other way to exist. But the humans are different." "How are they different?" Kethfrix demanded. "They do not want to rule us. the Hive General said. "And they do not want to destroy us. And they do not even want revenge for all the lives we have taken." "Then what do they want?" The Hive General's voice was barely above a whisper. "They want to go home. High Archon, and they want their people back. And they want to know that they will never be threatened again. And that is all." Kefrix sat in stunned silence as he processed these words for 3,000 years. The Velthari had conquered without mercy because mercy was weakness. For 3,000 years. They had crushed their enemies completely because anything less invited future rebellion. And now they faced a species that had the power to destroy them utterly, but chose not to use it. On the frozen moon where Intelligence Director Choi Yoonji had coordinated the resistance, she received word that the Hegemonic Council was preparing to meet. The neutral species had watched the war shift from Velthari dominance to human advantage. And now they wanted to discuss. What came next? Yoonji transmitted instructions to her network of spies and contacts throughout the galaxy. The Council is going to offer humanity a seat, she told Admiral Taehyun in a private communication. And this changes everything. Taehyun nodded grimly. If the other species recognize us as equals, the Velthari will be alone, he said. And they will have to choose between surrender and extinction. The question is whether they will make that choice. Yoonji replied, or whether their pride will doom them. The answer came 3 days later. The Hegemonic Council formally invited humanity to join as a full member. And the invitation carried an implicit message to the Velthari Dominion. The galaxy had chosen sides. And the Velthari had been abandoned. Kefrix received the news in silence. And for a long time he did not move or speak. His advisors waited nervously for his response, knowing that his next decision would determine the fate of their entire species. Finally, he spoke. "Arrange a communication with the human leadership," he said, "because if we continue this war, we will be destroyed, and even I can see that now." His advisors looked at each other in shock. No High Archon had ever sought peace terms with an enemy. No Velthari leader had ever admitted the possibility of defeat, but Kefrix was looking at the tactical displays that showed human ships surrounding his homeworld. And he was thinking about a Hive General who had been shown mercy by her captors. And he was wondering if perhaps the Velthari had been wrong about everything. The war was not over yet, but the ending was coming, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. 6 months had passed since the fall of New Bizen, and the Velthari Dominion had conquered 11 human colony worlds, and on every one of those worlds, they faced the same impossible problem. The humans would not stop fighting. Intelligence Director Choi Yoonji sat in her hidden command center deep beneath the frozen surface of an uncharted moon. And she studied the reports coming in from resistance cells across occupied space on Meridian. Human fighters had destroyed the main power station for the 3rd time in 2 weeks on Harvest. A Velthari supply convoy had vanished without a trace. And the only clue was a message painted on an empty warehouse wall that read, "We remember New Bizen" on Cascade. 3 Hive commanders had been assassinated in a single night, and the killer had left no evidence except a small human flag pinned to each body. Yoonji allowed herself a thin smile as she reviewed these reports. The Velthari had expected conquest to bring submission, but instead they had inherited a nightmare. She opened a communication channel to her network of resistance leaders, and one by one their faces appeared on her screen, some clear and some distorted by interference, but all of them showing the same fierce determination. "The enemy is beginning to pull troops back from the outer colonies," she said, "and this tells us that our strategy is working. But we must increase the pressure." A young man named Kang Ji-hoon, leader of the Meridian Resistance, spoke up. "Director, we have captured something that might change everything." Yoonji leaned forward with interest. "Explain." 3 days ago, We ambushed a Veltri command post, and we expected to find intelligence files and communication codes. But instead, we found a hive general. The other resistance leaders made sounds of surprise and disbelief. And Yunji understood why no species in the history of Veltri warfare had ever captured one of their senior commanders alive. The Veltri were engineered for battle from the moment they hatched. And their generals were the most dangerous of all. And they were supposed to fight to the death rather than allow themselves to be taken. How is this possible? Yunji asked. Jihoon's expression was complicated. She was injured in the initial attack, and her guards were killed. And when we found her, she was unconscious. And by the time she woke up, she was already in restraints, and she has not tried to kill herself. We have taken precautions, Jihoon said. But no, she has not tried, and Directa. I think she wants to understand us. This was unexpected. And Yunji filed it away for later consideration. Keep her alive and treat her well, she ordered. Because a living hive general is worth more than 100 successful raids. Meanwhile, on the neutral station of Thiessen, a different kind of battle was being fought. The Asini ambassador had requested a private meeting with human diplomat Baek Sohyun. And when Sohyun arrived at the designated chamber, she found not just the Asini, but representatives from 5 other council species waiting for her. Please sit, the Asini said. And its crystalline body caught the light as it gestured toward an empty chair. Sohyun sat and waited. We have been studying your species since first contact, the Asini continued. And we have compiled a comprehensive analysis that we believe the Hegemonic Council needs to see. It activated a display that filled the room with images and data. Sohyun saw pictures of Earth from orbit. Beautiful and blue and dangerous. She saw footage of human history, wars and disasters and diseases and famines. And through it all, humans surviving, humans adapting, humans refusing to die. Your homeworld is what we call a Category 12 death world, the Asini explained. And this is the highest rating in our classification system. And it means that your planet actively tries to kill everything that lives on it. Sohyun nodded because she already knew this. Your species evolved under constant threat. The Asini continued. From predators that wanted to eat you, from diseases that wanted to consume you, from weather that wanted to freeze or burn or drown you, and most remarkably, from each other. The display showed statistics that made the other ambassadors shift uncomfortably in their seats. In the last 10,000 years alone, your species has fought over 15,000 wars against itself, and you have developed weapons capable of destroying your entire planet. And you have survived extinction-level events that would have ended any other species we have encountered. The Asini turned all its faceted eyes toward Sohyun, Ambassador Baek. The Veltri believe they are fighting a young and inexperienced species, but they are wrong. And the truth is that humanity has more experience with war than any other civilization in this galaxy. What are you saying? Sohyun asked. We are saying that the Veltri made a terrible mistake, the Asini replied. And we are saying that your species is not a race of explorers who learn to fight. It paused for effect. You are a race of fighters who learn to explore. Sohyun felt a chill run down her spine because she knew the Asini was right on the Veltri homeworld. Hyarch and Kethrix received the daily reports from occupied human space. And each day the reports grew worse. Factories on conquered worlds produced nothing because human workers sabotaged every machine they touched. Roads and bridges collapsed because human engineers had built in hidden weaknesses. Veltri soldiers disappeared in the night, and when they were found, they were always dead. And the humans who killed them were never caught. How is this possible? Kethrix demanded of his military commanders. None of them had an answer. Then the report came from Meridian about the captured hive general. And Kethrix felt something he had not felt in centuries. He felt fear, not fear of losing the war, because that was still unthinkable. Fear of something worse. Fear that the Valkyrie did not understand their enemy at all. The interrogation footage from Meridian arrived a week later, and when Kethfrix watched it, his fear deepened. The human interrogators did not torture the Hive General. They did not starve her or beat her or threaten her. Instead, they brought her food and medical treatment and conversation. They asked about her life and her family and her beliefs, and they listened to her answers with genuine interest. The Hive General, a veteran of 50 campaigns who had crushed entire civilizations, seemed confused and troubled by this treatment. "Why do you not hurt me?" she asked in one recording. The human interrogator, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, simply smiled. "Because we are not like you," she said. Kethfrix watched that moment over and over, and each time he felt the fear grow stronger. He had conquered species that fought back with desperation and species that surrendered with resignation. But he had never encountered a species that showed mercy to its enemies in the middle of a war for survival. He did not understand it, he did not understand them, and that, he realized, was the most dangerous thing of all on her frozen moon. Intelligence Director Choi Yoonji received word that the human counteroffensive was ready to begin. The factories had done their work, and the training camps had done their work. And now hundreds of new warships crewed by millions of determined soldiers were preparing to take back everything the Valkyrie had stolen. Fleet Admiral Yoon Taeyeon, brother of Ambassador Yoon Seojin, would lead the assault. His message to the Valkyrie was short and simple. "We gave you a chance to stop, and you did not take it." Yoonji smiled as she read those words. The real war was about to begin. The colony world of New Bizen hung like a blue pearl against the darkness of space, and Admiral Park Jun-hyuk watched it from the bridge of his command ship with a heavy heart. 12 million people lived on that world, and he had less than 6 hours to get them all off the surface before the Valkyrie fleet arrived. "Admiral, the evacuation transports are at 70% capacity," his communications officer reported. "But we are running out of time." Park nodded grimly and turned to the tactical display that showed the approaching enemy fleet. 47 Valkyrie warships were burning toward New Bizen at maximum speed, and they would arrive hours before the promised deadline. And Park was not surprised because he had never trusted the Valkyrie to honor their word. He had only 3 destroyers to hold the line. The Inn's Defiance, commanded by Captain Wang Mira, held the center position, and flanking her were the Inn's Resolute and the Inn's Steadfast. And together these 3 small ships would face a fleet that could crack planets, open a channel to the destroyer captains. Park ordered. The 3 faces appeared on his screen, and he saw in each of them the same grim determination that he felt in his own chest. "You know the situation," he said, "and you know what I am asking you to do." Captain Wang Mira spoke first, and her voice was steady as stone. "We hold until the evacuation is complete, Admiral, and not 1 second less." The other 2 captains voiced their agreement, and Park felt pride and sorrow mixing in his heart like bitter medicine. "The Valkyrie have never faced human ships in combat," he said, "and they do not know what we are capable of, so show them, and make them remember this day for the rest of their history." The channel closed, and Park watched as the 3 destroyers moved into formation between New Bizen and the approaching enemy fleet aboard the Defiance. Captain Wang Mira ran her fingers along the worn edge of her command console. She had served in the fleet for 23 years, and she had always known that someday she might be asked to give her life for her people. And today was that day. "All hands, this is the captain," she said over the ship's intercom. "And in a few minutes we will engage the enemy. And I will not lie to you about our chances, but I will tell you this. Every minute we hold is another transport full of families reaching safety, and every Valkyrie ship we damage is 1 less ship that can threaten human worlds. So let us make this battle count." She paused and then added something She had not planned to say, "And if we are going to die today, let us die so loud that the entire galaxy hears us." The crew responded with a sound that was part cheer and part war cry. And Myra felt tears prick at her eyes, but she did not let them fall. The Velthari fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately began advancing on the human position. And their commander broadcast a message demanding immediate surrender. Myra did not bother to respond. Instead, she ordered her weapons officer to launch the first wave of attack drones. And these were not ordinary drones, but something new. Something human engineers had designed specifically for this kind of desperate situation. The Velthari had never seen suicide drones before, and they did not understand what was happening when the small craft ignored their point defense fire and slammed directly into their shield generators. 4 Velthari ships lost their shields in the first 30 seconds of battle, and before they could recover, the Defiance and her sister ships opened fire with electromagnetic pulse weapons that scrambled their targeting systems. The Velthari commander screamed orders in confusion, and his fleet broke formation as ships tried to avoid the unexpected assault. And in that chaos, the 3 human destroyers dove into the enemy formation like wolves into a flock of sheep. The battle lasted for 2 hours. The Resolute was the first to fall, but not before her captain rammed his crippled ship into a Velthari cruiser and took it with him into oblivion. The Steadfast lasted another 20 minutes, fighting with half her weapons destroyed and her hull breached in a dozen places, until finally her reactor went critical and she vanished in a flash of light. That took 3 enemy destroyers with her, and through it all, the Defiance kept fighting. Myra had lost count of how many times her ship had been hit, and she had lost half her crew. But she refused to give the order to retreat. "Admiral Park," she said over a static-filled channel. "What is the evacuation status?" Park's voice came back strained but triumphant. "The last transport just cleared the atmosphere, Captain. And 12 million people are safe because of you." Myra allowed herself a small smile. "Then our job is done," she said. She turned to her remaining crew, and she saw on their faces the same peace that she felt in her heart. Set collision course for the Velthari flagship. The Defiance accelerated toward the massive enemy vessel, and the Velthari threw everything they had at the small human ship, but it kept coming. And in those final moments, the crew of the Defiance began to sing. They sang an old song from Earth, a song about soldiers who knew they would not return. And the Velthari intercepted the transmission and heard this strange alien music filling the void. The Defiance struck the flagship at full speed, and both ships disappeared in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness like a new star when the battle ended. The Velthari had taken New Bizon, but they had lost 19 ships to 3 human destroyers, and their commander had no idea how to explain this to High Archon Kethrix on the colony surface. Velthari troops moved through empty streets and found abandoned homes and shuttered businesses. And they found one thing more in a small house near the center of the capital city. Someone had left a recording device active, and when the troops played it back, they heard the voice of a child. "My name is Yu Minji, and I am 7 years old," the voice said. "And the aliens are making us leave our home, but my mother says we will come back someday. And when we come back, I want the aliens to know that this is our house, and they cannot have it forever." The Velthari commander ordered the recording destroyed because it disturbed his troops in ways he could not explain, but the damage was already done across human space. The footage of the Defiance's final charge spread like wildfire, and people watched the small ship dive into the enemy flagship, and they heard the crew singing as they died. And something changed in the hearts of billions. At recruitment centers, the lines grew longer. In factories, workers volunteered for double shifts to build more ships in military academies. Cadets trained harder than they had ever trained before, and in every city and town and village, people spoke the names of Captain Wang Mira and the crews of the Defiance and the Resolute and the Steadfast. And they swore that those deaths would not be in vain on his command ship. Admiral Park Jun-hyuk received reports from across human space. And what he saw gave him hope. Humanity was not broken by this first battle. Humanity was forged by it. He thought of Mira and her crew singing as they faced death. And he made a silent promise to them. "We will win this war," he whispered to the stars. "And when we do, your names will be carved into monuments that will stand for 1,000 years. The war had truly begun now, and the Valkyrie had no idea what was coming for them. The grand chamber of the Hegemonic Council stretched upward like a cathedral built for giants. And Ambassador Yoon Seo-jin stood at its center feeling very small indeed. She had practiced her trade proposal 100 times on the journey to Nexus Prime, and she knew every word by heart. But now, as she looked up at the 12 towering seats that surrounded her, each one holding a representative of a different star-faring species, she felt her confidence waver just slightly. The Mirathi delegate floated in a suspension field to her left, its jellyfish-like body pulsing with soft bioluminescence that indicated polite attention, and beside it sat the Orsini ambassador, a crystalline being whose faceted eyes reflected Seo-jin's image back at her 1,000 times over. She cleared her throat and continued her presentation about shipping routes and tariff reductions. And most of the council seemed receptive enough. But she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The feeling had started the moment she entered the chamber and noticed the Valkyrie delegation. High Archon Kethrix sat in the largest seat, his insectoid body covered in ceremonial armor that gleamed like polished obsidian. And his compound eyes had not left Seo-jin since she began speaking. And there was something in his stillness that reminded her of a predator waiting to strike. The Valkyrie Dominion had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 3,000 years. And in all that time, they had never lost a war. And the 14 civilizations they had crushed stood as monuments to their military supremacy. And everyone in the chamber knew this history as well as they knew their own names. Seo-jin finished her proposal and bowed respectfully to the council. And for a moment there was silence. Then Kethrix rose from his seat, and his voice filled the chamber like the sound of stones grinding together. "The human ambassador speaks of trade and cooperation," he said. "But she does not speak of the truth that burns in the hearts of her people." Seo-jin felt her stomach drop, but she kept her face calm as she had been trained to do. "High Archon, I'm not sure what you mean," she said carefully. Kethrix descended from his platform, his 6 legs clicking against the polished floor with each step. And he stopped just 3 meters from where Seo-jin stood, towering over her by more than 2 meters. "Your species has expanded along our border for 50 years, he said. "And each year you grow bolder, and each year your ships travel closer to Valkyrie space. And we have watched this with patience, but our patience has reached its end." The chamber erupted in whispers, and Seo-jin saw the Mirathi delegate's bioluminescence shift to alarmed yellow. And the Orsini ambassador leaned forward with sudden intense interest. "High Archon," Seo-jin said, keeping her voice steady, "humanity has no hostile intentions toward the Dominion, and our expansion has followed all established treaties and protocols, treaties written by the weak to constrain the strong," Kethrix replied. And then he turned to address the full council. "I speak now with the authority of the Valkyrie Dominion, and I declare that a state of war exists between our people and the human species." The words hit Seo-jin like a physical blow, and for a moment she could not breathe. War with the Valkyrie meant death on a scale humanity had never experienced. And everyone in the galaxy knew this, and Kethrix knew this. And yet he had spoken the words anyway. The Druid elder, ancient beyond measure and silent throughout most council sessions, stirred in his seat, and his voice crackled like old paper when he spoke. "This action is unwise. High Archon, Kethrix turned his compound eyes toward the elder with something that might have been contempt. "The Druin have grown too old to remember what strength means," he said. "But the Velthari remember, and we will remind the galaxy." Seojin found her voice at last, and she stepped forward despite every instinct telling her to retreat. "If the Dominion truly intends war," she said, "then I request 72 hours to evacuate civilian populations from contested systems. And this is standard protocol under Galactic Convention." Kethrix made a sound that might have been laughter, though it sounded more like metal scraping against metal. 48 hours, he said. "And consider this a mercy, for the Velthari are not required to show mercy at all." Seojin wanted to argue, wanted to fight for every additional hour that might save lives. But she saw in the High Archon's eyes that this was the only concession she would receive. 48 hours, she repeated, and her voice did not shake even though her hands trembled at her sides. She turned and walked toward the chamber exit. And with every step she felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down upon her shoulders. And she knew that when she reached her ship she would have to send a message that would change human history forever. As she passed the Druin Elder's seat, she heard his voice one final time, barely above a whisper. "The Velthari do not understand what they have awakened," he said. "And by the time they learn, it will be far too late." Seojin did not respond, but she carried those words with her as she left the chamber and boarded her shuttle and began the journey back to human space. 12 hours later, emergency broadcasts interrupted every channel on every human world. People stopped in the streets and looked up at public screens, and families gathered around their home displays, and workers paused in factories and offices and farms to listen. The message was simple and direct. An alien empire called the Velthari Dominion had declared war on humanity, and the government was calling for calm, but also for preparation. And civilian evacuations would begin immediately in border systems. For a long moment after the broadcast ended, there was silence across human space. Then the silence gave way to something else. Something that the Velthari had never encountered in 3,000 years of conquest. Something that would change everything. It was not panic and it was not despair. It was anger on Earth. In Seoul and Sao Paulo and Cairo and New York and 1,000 other cities, people began to move with purpose. And recruitment centers that had been quiet for decades suddenly found lines forming outside their doors. On colony worlds near the border, families loaded their belongings onto evacuation ships. But they did not weep as they left their homes. And instead they looked back at their cities and their farms with hard eyes and made silent promises to return. On military vessels stationed throughout human space, crews received their orders and prepared for battles that most of them would not survive. And they did this not because they were fearless, but because they understood something that the Velthari did not. Humanity had fought itself for 10,000 years before reaching the stars. And every generation had faced extinction and refused to accept it. And this war would be no different in her quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel carrying her home. Ambassador Yoon Seo-jin composed a report to the human government. She wrote about the council session and the declaration and the 48-hour mercy. And then she paused and added one final observation. "The Velthari believe this war will be swift," she wrote. "And they believe humanity will crumble as 14 other species crumbled before us. And they believe their 3,000 years of victory have taught them everything about warfare. But they are wrong. And they are wrong because they have never fought a species that was forged in fire the way we were forged. And by the time they understand their mistake, we will make them pay for every life they have taken and every world they have burned." She sent the report and then sat in silence for a long time. The war had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again.